in that time, a lot of my friends from college have gotten sober. Just in the last 5 to 7 years, a lot of people have gotten sober. And when I talk to my old friends now, all of us are just sort of shocked at how much we drank. It wasn't on the weekends. It was every night. It was every night.
I'm going to start with this. So I have had the privilege of reading a digital kind of pre-read of your book that's coming out. It's coming out in the summer, right?
It's coming out at the end of September.
September. Okay. Fall time. Drink Your Way Sober. Awesome title. We're going to get into that. The science-based method to break free from alcohol. But something jumped out to me on the first couple pages I wanted to ask you about to kick us off. So you are an accomplished journalist, podcaster, very well-researched, very thoughtful. And you kicked off your book with a quote from Homer Simpson.
The sage. Everyone needs a guru.
Exactly. And the quote, which is phenomenal, and I'm going to ask you about why you chose that quote, but the quote, and this is quoting Homer, to alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
It's so true, isn't it? A temporary solution. Long-term, not so much, but temporary solution.
So true. Why did you choose that? And maybe just go a little deeper there.
So the truth is that I thought it was funny. And I thought that would be, I was actually surprised that I've read a lot of Quit Lit, and I was surprised that I couldn't find any other books that had started with that little, what's it called, an epigraph, because it seems like such an obvious one. I think it speaks to I don't know how you feel about the term alcoholic, but it's a term that I use to describe myself. And I think it speaks to a very common alcoholic experience, which is this substance that we both love and hate. It sort of captures all of it. And I wanted it to sort of set the tone for the book. The book is serious for sure, but there are also moments of humor, and I thought that would set the tone really well.
I love that. A serious and consequential and important topic, but just kind of layering in some lightheartedness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, anybody who has sat through enough AA meetings, and we'll get into it, but I did not get sober through AA, but I have sat through many meetings. AA meetings, there are moments of, there can be moments of absolute horror and moments of absolute levity. And I think that any problem drinker has experienced probably much of both.
There's beauty in those spaces, and then there's sadness, and there's some things that are scary for sure. You mentioned language, and that's actually one of the things that I was really looking forward to asking you about, because you're also very intentional about the language that you choose, and you lay that out in the first sections of your book. One of the things that jumped out to me, you did use alcoholic, but you talk a lot about the spectrum, right? Alcohol use disorder. And then also, I pulled this out, person with alcohol problems or struggles, right? Let's talk about the importance of language when we talk about this.
Yeah, so a lot of people in the recovery community absolutely hate the term alcoholic or alcoholism. And clinicians, as I'm sure you know, clinicians have really moved away from that term because it seems to, there's a couple reasons. I think part of it, is a well-intentioned desire to use a term that isn't as loaded, to get away from the stigma that comes along with alcoholic. I completely get that. But there's this concept of the euphemism treadmill, right? And so any term that is used to describe a concept, a term becomes outdated or becomes politically incorrect, or is too loaded with stigma. People or institutions change the terminology, and that term ends up becoming outdated and politically correct. And you can see this most readily in terms like, the term used to describe people with Down syndrome used to be mongoloid. And then the politically correct term was retarded. And now that term is politically incorrect. So terminology is constantly changing. And I think that's one reason that clinicians have moved away from the term alcoholism and alcoholic, because it's just so loaded. And the other reason, and probably the more important reason, is, as you mentioned, alcohol use disorder is a spectrum. It's a vast spectrum. And where you fall on that spectrum, if you're at the sort of mild end of the spectrum, the word alcoholic might not feel like it describes you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a problem. I'm totally fine with using the term alcoholic to describe myself. I don't think I am an alcoholic anymore, but I think I was for a long time. I don't consider myself in recovery. I consider myself recovered, which in itself is probably fairly controversial. But I'm comfortable with that term in part because I think it's really evocative. Everybody knows what you mean when you say alcoholic. And I use terms like drunk, wino, lush, these colloquial terms because, I'm a writer and I like the way they sound. That's also just part of it.
Yeah, it kind of rolls off the tongue. And I think what I've had some pretty cool people with a lot of insights on this show to talk about this very topic. The difference between alcohol use disorder, alcoholic. I've heard it described as a moral model, and also like more clinical model. But I haven't had someone kind of float between the two.
I'm sort of in between those worlds, I would say.
Yeah, I've heard you actually say there's like this kind of on or off myth is something I heard you say on a podcast interview, meaning that we tend to think about drinking as we're either like it's completely sabotaging and ruining our life. We're experiencing homelessness. It's a disaster and you can't drink at all. Or you're basically completely absent. Like, but the point is like, I think there's kind of space in the gray for some people. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's, AA, I never knock AA. AA has saved so many. It feels like virtue signaling when I'm saying this, but it genuinely has saved so many people's lives. And I'm not just saying that because I don't want the AA people to come for me, but within AA and within sort of traditional 12-step models and within the rehab industry, there's this persistent idea that once you have crossed that invisible line into problem drinking, into alcoholism, that is it. You can never have another sip. And I find that from my experience, that thinking, which I believed for a long time, kept me drinking for much longer than I should have. I kept drinking for 15 years after I sort of knew that I had a problem. I continued to drink because that idea that the only path forward was total abstinence, that I could never have a drink again, was so not just scary, it was incomprehensible. I literally could not imagine my life without alcohol. And if that was the only path forward, I didn't want it. And, there are programs like moderation management. I sort of dabbled in that. I dabbled in smart recovery. But in the end, the message that I think most of us have absorbed, those of us of a certain age, this might be different for younger folks, but the message we have largely absorbed from the culture is that once you're an alcoholic, the only step forward is total abstinence.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. Just the idea of not having any alcohol whatsoever. When I was contemplating that, I just go to this is controversial as well, but I've had some really amazing times when alcohol was involved. Growing up in the Jersey Shore, their alcohol was all over the place, right? And I've had these like incredibly euphoric high moments of like, and I don't mean literally high, but like these big moments of like tailgating for a concert, going out and celebrating people's 21st birthdays, and then even kind of more subtle things, but like now later on in life, like, going out and enjoying a good glass of wine for dinner with my wife, like I have such positive experiences. So when I was unaware of the different like avenues to have a healthier relationship or no relationship, it's like, I was thinking like, well, do I have to give all of that away? And it's almost like a FOMO and sadness.
Totally. Oh, yeah. I think there's a real grieving process for people. Alcohol, this is sort of a cliche, but alcohol, it feels like a toxic lover. You know what I mean? Like something that you absolutely know is bad for you, but you can't give up. Or at least that was my experience with it. I did eventually give it up. I've been sober now for several years, totally sober. Don't miss it. Much happier than I was before. But for the vast majority of my adulthood, and I started drinking in middle school, the vast majority of my, not even adulthood, but like youth, adolescence, alcohol was such a through line and such a part of my identity that I could not imagine living without it. It would be like living without food or water. That's how intrinsic it was to my daily experience.
Yeah. Where'd you get that from? Why do you think that it latched onto you the way that it did?
I think it's twofold. I think part of it is genetics. I come from my parents I wouldn't describe them as alcoholics, but I have alcohol in my extended. I come from like a very Irish Catholic family. Actually from New Jersey. I'm not from New Jersey, but my mom's side of the family is all from that area. Big family, and a lot of addiction on that side of my family. So I think that's part of it. I just had a genetic propensity for alcoholism. And I think, the other thing is exposure. So I don't have all of the risk factors. Like I don't have trauma in my background or anything like that. I come from a very stable family home, but I had genetic risk and I started drinking young and I drank repeatedly. So those factors themselves, it was sort of like the perfect cocktail.
So you said you started drinking at like 14 years old, but then earlier on you said sorry, were you going to jump in there?
Well, I had my first drink. I was in middle school. I mean, even before high school. Yeah, I was probably like 12, which seems crazy. That seems so, like, at the time it seemed very normal. Now it seems, I look at 12-year-olds now, it's like, you're babies.
Now I can side diatribe here, but I can remember the absolute first time I ever had alcohol. It was at a St. Patty's Day party. Everyone came over, and my cousin, he listens, I won't name him, he knows who he is, came up and he gave me a Miller Lite. And I can remember that first feeling of being buzzed. To double click on that, what grabbed me, and it's taken me years to realize this, but like the buzz, fine, that's a word, we all get it. But it was the first time that I ever kind of disassociated or ingested anything that shifted my headspace. And that's what I became addicted to. I can remember that switch. And it took 2 decades for me to really question why, like, why me? But back to you. So what was it like, high school, college?
Pretty typical. I drank in high school. I'm from Western North Carolina, sort of a rural Appalachian area. Keg parties in someone's field, everybody drinking by the silo, burning tires and Christmas trees. And then in college, like a very, very heavy drink. I didn't go to a party. I went to sort of like a hippie partying school. I went to University of North Carolina at Asheville, which is sort of like a poor man's, I don't know, Hampshire college or something. And, just a really heavy drinking culture. And now I talk to a lot of people that I went to college with. So I graduated 20 years ago. Actually, it's shocking to me. So 20 years ago, in that time, a lot of my friends from college have gotten sober. Just in the last like 5 to 7 years, a lot of people have gotten sober. And when I talk to my old friends now, all of us are just sort of shocked at how much we drank. It wasn't on the weekends. It was every night. It was every night. And a lot of my friends grew out of that. After college, they got jobs, they settled down, they had to be at work in the morning. And so they just gradually aged out of drinking. And that is incredibly common. When I was researching the book, I was really surprised to find out this is called natural recovery. And it's just sort of, this is what most people do. Most people are able to sort of just think, you know what, this isn't working for my life anymore. I got to get up in the morning. I don't want to be hungover, so I'm not going to drink. I wasn't able to do that. So my life really revolved around when, where, and how much I could drink. And it was like that for another almost 2 decades.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Now, was it like peaks and valleys?
Yes. Yeah, peaks and valleys. So my 20s was absolutely crazy. Drinking every night at the bars, every night. I was I was broke. So if I could afford only food or booze, I would choose booze. I would go to and get a smoothie, so I would have something in my belly to suck up the alcohol, and then I would drink my diet. Such a barfly at the bar every night. And then my 30s, I started to get my shit together a little bit more. I realized that I worked like menial jobs. I was fired from a million jobs. And then in my 30s, I started to get a little bit more serious about work. And then I was able to say okay, I'm going to do this on the weekends, but eventually I always sort of drifted back to those same patterns where I was drinking daily. I was drinking earlier during the day. But my career progressed. I moved a bunch of times. I got into a serious relationship. And then COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, I was laid off from my job. I was a reporter at a newspaper in Seattle. And I got laid off really at the very beginning of COVID. And so I was just home. My wife is a nurse, and so she was gone all the time. And I was just at home by myself. And what started out as I'll just drink in the evenings, drink in the afternoons. Gradually was all right, I'm drinking at 11. I'm drinking at 10. I'm drinking at 9. And this was totally in secret. My wife had no idea. I actually got sober in secret as well. So a very dark, shameful time. But yeah, it became like a full-time obsession. And that to me is my drinking did come and go in waves, but over that period of time, from basically high school until I got sober for the last time, no matter what my consumption was, I would have periods of sobriety, but no matter what my consumption was, the thing that never changed was the obsession, the mental obsession. I was completely consumed by, if I was going to drink, like in periods of sobriety, I still thought about drinking all the time. I probably thought about more because the only thing that would quiet that voice in my head was drinking. And then it would only quiet it for a little while. And then, the whole thing starts over again.
Look, 1 in 10 Americans today struggle with alcohol use disorder, and I was one of them. Did you know that there is a safe, science-backed daily pill that you can take to drink less or even quit alcohol for good? It's called naltrexone, a doctor-prescribed medication that you get online, and our sponsor, Or Health, is the nation's leading provider of naltrexone. To date, Or Health has helped over 35,000 people find freedom from alcohol, and I'm proudly one of them. To get started, text STRENGTH to 710-710. Again, that's STRENGTH to 710-710 and get started on your journey to finally find freedom from alcohol.
I heard this quote once, like, you don't know the power of something until you try to, or I should say, you don't know the power that something has a hold on you until you try to move away from it. And to that, what I can totally just relate with, it's like when I was kind of ebbing and flowing with drinking problems, and I was more of the binge variety than the frequency. Later in life, the frequency kicked up. The point is, it's like, I remember times where I'd be like, day 28 and I'm day 29, day 30. And even though that's a healthy discipline, if you're trying to move away, it's still in a way is just basically controlling you, because when you're not drinking, you're thinking about not drinking. And then when you're drinking, you're feeling shame, which is an important word. So you're don't blush, but you're an accomplished journalist. You mentioned very kind of quickly there, like, oh, I was working as a reporter. How, even though in your 20s, it sounds like you had a pretty bad relationship with alcohol, what was your career doing at that time that kind of allowed you to get to that point?
So my career, I basically didn't have a career until I turned 30. And when I turned 30, I was working at a publishing house, like a small academic publishing house. And I decided that the real reason is someone dumped me. I got broken up with, and I was incredibly spiteful. And the woman at the time who broke up with me, she was a journalist. She worked in public radio. And I've always been a big like NPR fan. I've always listened to a ton of NPR. And I was like, I'm gonna fucking, if she can do this, I can do this. And so I went and I took an unpaid internship in public radio. I got my first job, and I was like, she has a good career. My career is going to be better. And I spent the next few years just like completely motivated by spite, completely. And that was the only thing that worked for me.
Now, when you met your now wife, when you were first getting to know each other, was she aware?
I had told her that I had a history of alcohol abuse, but I really didn't drink around her very much. I got lucky that I met someone who I was so comfortable with that I didn't need to drink around her. And so we just didn't have a relationship that revolved around drinking. And the other thing that really helped in that respect was that so for most of my drinking years, I was a cigarette smoker, and I could not do one without the other. The idea of having a drink without chain smoking cigarettes was torturous. And so I would rather not drink than not drink and not smoke, if that makes any sense. Like I could not have a drink without a cigarette. And she's a nurse, and she was very clear when we got together, like, I don't date smokers. And I was like, okay, well, I'm never going to drink around this woman because I'm going to want a cigarette, and I don't want her to know that I'm also smoking. It's not a particularly healthy. We've been together now for 10 years. She knows all this shit now. But that actually made it easier, and because it was just like I had this rule, and I've always sort of been good about imposing rules on myself for like small amounts of times. It's not a healthy rule. I don't drink if I can't smoke, but that was my rule. I just won't drink. And so that made it easy to not be in that place where I was like getting loaded around her because I didn't want to smoke. I didn't want to have that craving. And really, our relationship is just like, she's a really moderate drinker. It's just not an issue for her. And so alcohol was just really never a part of our relationship. And she had really no idea that I started drinking during COVID until like I got sober, and then like waited a year until I had like over a full year sober. And then I told her, like, surprise, like I'm sober, but also I like was secretly drinking for years behind your back while you were at work saving people. And we're still married. It's shocking.
I remember when I wasn't necessarily in a season of struggling with alcohol, I used to hear stories of people sneaking it and lying and going out to the old like garage fridge, right? Hiding it from their spouses or partners. And I would honestly think in that moment in naivety and ignorance, like, that's really sad. I'll never get there.
It'll never be me. Yeah.
And I can remember, like, I've heard you use the word compulsion before. I would not be planning on drinking that day. And next thing you know, it almost felt like this is a little dramatic, but like zombie sleepwalking. And there was this switch. And I remember I slugged some ridiculous modern IPA that was like an 8.9%, which, by the way, I bought for a reason, but it probably was subconsciously. I chose that one. And then I was like, I don't want my wife to know. I lift up the recycling thing and I stuffed it down.
On the bottom. Oh, yeah.
And I was like, holy shit, here I am. The compulsion to get there, and then the secrecy, and then that snowballed. All right, so and then I want to hear the journey, how, but like when you kind of decided, okay, I need to start consistently moving in a healthier direction. When was that, and how did you go about it?
So this was about 2 years into COVID, and I was not in denial about my drinking. My first sort of realization that I had an alcohol problem, I was in my early 20s. And so that's when I first started like going to AA meetings and trying to get control of it. And I would go through periods where I would do that, but I would always revert to the mean. I would always go back to the bar. But my life continued. I progressed, career, didn't like take off, but limped along to the point where I was getting jobs. Relationship was fine, bought a house, sort of all of his markers of I'm a lesbian, so wife and a dog rather than wife and a kid. But, we got the adventure van, did all that shit. So on the surface, I had stability, but during COVID, I was just like drinking like crazy every day. Or not every day, because my wife, I didn't drink when she was at home, so I would drink when she was at work, or if she like went to the grocery store, I'd pound a couple. So I've always been a beer drinker, and I would go down to the store. I would walk down to the corner store by my house. And different ones always. So like, typically I would get a 6-pack of Tall Boys. So that's, the 24-ounce beers. So, and I would drink on a full day, I would drink 6 of them. And sometimes more. So like a huge amount of liquid, just so much liquid. I've always preferred kind of low alcohol beers. Like I've never liked IPAs. I like shitty lagers. And part of the reason is because I could drink longer. If I have an 8-ounce high gravity IPA, I'm having 1 or 2 and then I'm hitting the deck. If I have a beer that's, less than 4% alcohol, I can drink all day on that. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to drink all day. And so I would do that. My wife would be gone for 12 hours and I would drink for, not 12 hours. I'd wake up and like go for a walk, maybe eat something, but I would start drinking in the afternoon. And like you, it was like every day I would wake up and say, I'm not doing this. It was like my body and like my brain was saying, don't do it, don't do it. My body's like, we're going to the store. And then I had this like routine where I would go to the store, I would get my 6-pack, I would come home, I would start drinking and chain smoking and smoking weed at the same time. And I would sit on my deck and do that all day long. And then my wife, so she commuted into Seattle, so she was never going to like surprise me at home because there's a ferry. She has to take a ferry to work and the ferry schedule is regimented. So I knew when she was going to be home. And so I would drink until she got off of work, and then I shower, clean the house really quick and just put on my sober face. And she never had any idea for 2 years that she was coming home to a loaded spouse. And then, when we like eat dinner, watch TV, I pass out on the couch and then go to bed, wake up at 3:00 in the morning, just shame, so much shame, like knowing that I'm killing myself, but completely unable to change it. And so I did that for 2 years. And I knew that this was it had gotten to the point where I had to do something. And I knew that my option, and this was during COVID, and Washington State was very locked down. So there were like Zoom AA meetings, but the AA, I live in a small town. A lot of the AA meetings in my town were, they were like in-person meetings. They were canceled right away. And then the groups just sort of died. And then, so I did some Zoom meetings and shit like that in various different places, but it never really, I couldn't stick with it. It didn't make me, especially because I was at home, so it's like I'm doing a Zoom meeting and there's like a beer like right there. Like there's no incentive, But I knew that it was like, here were my options. Rehab, AA, or something else. And rehab wasn't a real option because super fucking expensive. And also, if I went to inpatient rehab, my wife was going to notice. And everybody was going to know. Like I was at the time I had started a podcast, and like I couldn't just take, and I was like, this was my job now, and I couldn't just disappear for 28 days. It just like didn't work. And also I didn't want to quit drinking. So that was the other like main barrier, was that I really didn't want to stop. I wanted to stop, but I didn't want to stop, So I had, years before this, I had read an article in The Atlantic called, the title doesn't actually tell you what it's about. The title was something about like the statistics of an AA or something like that. But what I took from the article was that there was this other way to get sober or to get control over your drinking called the Sinclair Method. And I had actually tried it. So after I read the article, I went and I got a prescription for naltrexone. So I assume most of your listeners are aware of how it works, but for anybody who isn't, the Sinclair Method is medication-assisted treatment that does not require abstinence. So you take this drug, naltrexone, it's an opioid blocker. It blocks endorphins, so the like rush, the euphoria that you get from alcohol, it blocks that. So you take the pill, you wait 1 hour for it to metabolize, and then you drink on the pill. And that to me sounded fucking perfect, right? I could literally drink my way through recovery. It sounded too good to be true. So years before COVID, this was in maybe like 2018, I got a prescription for the pill. And I got off work one day, went and picked up a tall boy, went home, took half a pill, started at 25 milligrams, took the pill, and just felt horrible, like nausea, headache, depression, just like did not work for me. So I thought, you know what? Great. So I thought like after reading the article, I thought like, oh, miracle pill. I just need this. And then I took it one time and I was like, fuck, this is not going to work for me. I'm way too sick. And so I put it in the back of my medicine cabinet, and it sat there for 4 years. I just never took it again. It was always there. I knew that I had it, but I just was like, it made me feel like shit. I'm not going to do it. And then during COVID, it was like, okay, this is going to kill me. And I looked terrible, like bloated. I look back at pictures from that time and I'm like, I can tell in my eyes, like this was in the dark days. So in 2022, I got to the point where it was like, all right, I have one more shot at this. And if this doesn't work, I'm going to have to come clean. I'm going to have to tell my wife. I'm going to have to tell my family what I've been doing. I've been keeping this secret forever. And I just got to try this one thing. And I did. And I started out this time, I didn't take a half a pill. I took a quarter pill. There's all these Facebook groups for people doing the Sinclair Method. And I binged on these groups to try to learn everything that I could, watch YouTube videos. I interviewed people. And so I started out with a quarter of a pill. I took it on a full stomach with a full glass of water. And I still got a little bit of side effects, but they just weren't as bad. And that was the beginning for me, was that first time. And I think I still drank 6 beers that day. Maybe not tall boys, like normal size beers. But that was it. That was kind of the beginning. And I spent the next about 8 months, almost like I was training for a marathon. But the marathon was involved drinking. And gradually over 8 months, I literally drank myself sober. It changed my life. It saved my life. It changed my life in ways and I did this totally in secret. I didn't tell anyone what was going on. And then I had a full year of sobriety, and I finally came, maybe even 2 years. It took a while. I told my wife at some point. She knows now.
When you're already out of it, you're like, hey, just so you know, I just went through some shit and I'm here for it.
And she would have been totally supportive. She's a much better person than I am. She's not the type to cut and run because someone is having a problem. But I needed to solve the problem before I went to her and fessed up. And then eventually, the thing that's so different about the medication, I'm curious to hear if this is your experience as well, is that the thing I really feared was that compulsion, was never getting rid of that voice in my head that was always screaming at me to drink. And the medication silenced the compulsion. And so once I was sober, I didn't think about alcohol anymore.
Look, life can be hard and stressful sometimes. We all know that. But when it comes to supplements, why is it that nobody talks about stress and resilience? For me, I take the adaptogen stack from Momentous Supplements. It's a daily blend of ashwagandha, rhodiola, and L-theanine, all clinically backed to help you stay calm, focused, and resilient. I'm proudly partnered with Momentous Supplements because they are the industry's best. They don't cut corners. Everything's third-party tested, used by pro athletes, and high quality. Head to livemomentous.com and use code STRENGTH for 35% off your first order. Again, that's livemomentous.com, code word STRENGTH for 35% off your first order, and get started today.
So I jumped into what is, I guess you'd call like the daily method. That's what we're originally as a proponent of. And I know that they're kind of moving towards embracing either method. But for me, I had side effects as well. And that it caused me to put it down twice. I eat all the time, so I probably had a full stomach. I didn't think intentionally to eat with it, which I know you're supposed to do. But I'll say this, why I put it down the first time is I felt, I can't find words for it, but I felt off. My kids were talking to me. And I just was like, wasn't able to focus. And I started worrying, and I researched it and it debunked my concerns. But I started worrying that those same opioid receptors that the drug is actively working on to block the endorphins, I started worrying like, oh, is it also blocking other like experiences that are causing endorphins, like healthy things, like hugs and stuff? So I started just having concerns. So I just didn't like feeling off. But when I eventually came around to it, I can remember, I'll never forget the first time I took 25 milligrams as well. So half a pill. And I normally to use a buzzword, I guess, like my triggering time where I would be triggered is when I was like wrapping up a busy day of work and I had no space to transition to when I was overstimulated by kids and voices and sounds and neediness. And then it goes to like dinner and all these other things. And I would just feel dysregulated. And that's when I would just, how you put it, I loved it. Like my body was like, go grab that beer, that'll help. And around dinner time is normally when I would have like my first like heavy drink. But I remember I think it was the second day I took naltrexone. I remember when I sat down, I already had one drink. And when I sat down at the table and you know this, when that drink is half empty, you're already kind of like thinking about the next one. I'll never forget. It was just like the loudest quiet moment ever. I sat there and had this realization where I was just like, I don't really care. And it was noticeable to me. There is definitely something to this. At that time, I didn't have a porch routine. I had like a night routine, and it wasn't every night, you know? So I think for me, it wasn't as big a leap to go from where I was to where I wanted to be. And then I found out about TSM later on.
I'm curious, as someone who's done both, I'm curious to hear how your experiences, how daily vary, or what's the difference for you in terms of daily versus TSM?
So some of it's very probably unique to me. There's something about, I don't want, this language sucks, but it's the only thing I think of, having to take something every day all the time. I don't like, and I'm like, that pattern is in my life all over the place. I just like the idea that I can just be like thoughtful and strategic. I found that between the two, they both work. So why not?
Yeah, take it less. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I still, at the end, I don't like the way naltrexone makes me feel. And that was eventually after like 8 months, I did 30 days. And then once the 30 days were over, I just never started drinking again. But that idea, I got to the point where it's like weighing the cost benefit of like, I want to have a drink. I don't really want to take the pill because the pill kind of makes me feel like shit. And so for me, I think even once the physical side effects has worn off, it's an endorphin blocker. It doesn't try having sex on naltrexone. I was so, immersed in TSM circles that it really took starting the process of writing the book and doing a lot of research before I realized that daily is a legitimate way to take it. Because in some, specifically like online, there's a lot of Facebook groups for TSM. And in those groups, you will frequently see people say daily doesn't work. If people are doing it daily, they're doing it wrong. And I internalized that. I thought the reason that this isn't more well known is because doctors are prescribing it wrong. And it took talking to Joe Vopicelli at Penn, who's like the godfather of naltrexone, and doing a lot of talking to a lot of clinicians and people like Claudia and Katie Lane, who are more TSM focused, but are really, really knowledgeable about this issue, to realize, like, you don't have to be dogmatic about this. Daily works better for some people. TSM works better for some people. Vivitrol works better for some people. For some people, what works is they might not have a problem in general, like daily life is normal, don't have a compulsion, but they get way too loaded on vacation. So just taking naltrexone when they're on vacation. And for some people, all of it combined works best. So you take daily and then you take a double dose before the office Christmas party or whatever. And all of that is completely valid. And what I find so interesting about this is, like, there have been a fuck ton of studies on naltrexone, but the studies don't really reflect the vast array of experiences that people have on this. So you can get better information on how to take this drug on the internet than you can from your doctor. There's like so few things in the world, baby. Like, you want good medical information, go to Reddit. You know, I'm not that person, but that's actually true in this case. And I mean, and now there are groups like, or there are companies like Or and coaching services. And you can get so much information and good information from people that you don't need to crowdsource it entirely on your own. You can pay somebody to tell you how to do it. I highly recommend people do this. There's many resources, totally worth it. But yeah, you just go to your family physician, probably not going to know that much about this.
Yeah, and what I think is really cool about, like, our stories, like, I feel like there's a lot of commonality there. But I think it's so cool using different vehicles. We're both advocating for the same thing, which is people to get more aware of those different options that are out there. But, like, what I'm encouraged about is I'm sensing, and I know that you're probably more in the trenches and informed on this, but even some of, like, recent administration picks, there are people that have a connection to, you know, substance use, alcohol use, and I'm hearing the word holistic health. I'm just like sensing, it's just an instinct, but that there is towards more awareness on just different avenues for this type of thing.
Yeah, I'm not super optimistic about anything coming out at the federal level for many reasons we don't necessarily need to get into. But I do think there has been a sea change in terms of this idea that the only way forward is through 12 steps and total abstinence. And what you do is you go to rehab and then you start going to AA and you do that every day for 90 days and then you just never drink again. And part of the reason is not because of alcohol, but it's because of the opioid crisis. Because the term medication-assisted treatment is now something that that all providers know about, because they know that fentanyl and heroin is not really something that you can white-knuckle your way through. Some people do, a small number of people do, but it's much more, the gold standard of treatment is Suboxone. And there are all sorts of access issues in terms of getting treatment like this, but there has been a change because I think the medical establishment has realized, like, we need to look at medications, and alcohol use disorder kills more people than any other substance on earth. We need to look at this. And one thing that has really changed as well is medical education. So when I would go to doctors until, like, recently, most of my doctors, you know, they probably went to med school in the 80s or 90s, maybe the 70s, maybe earlier. And their entire education about addiction, all substances, might have been attending one AA meeting. That's it. And that's changed, but it's only changed in, like, this new upcoming generation of doctors. And so now everyone who goes to med school, in their psych rotation, they're gonna learn about naltrexone, Camperol, Antabuse. They're gonna learn about both the FDA-approved medications for alcohol use disorder and medication-assisted treatment for other substance abuse issues. Is it a perfect system? No. There should be a focus in family medicine, in emergency medicine, and instead what's happening is, in most places, they're getting basically like a short, like a primer in their psych rotation, and that's not enough. Like, every doctor, especially like emergency and family doctors, should be required to really understand, evaluating their patients for alcohol use disorder and treating them. And that, I don't think we're there yet, but we're getting there.
Yeah, something I didn't mention, you couldn't possibly know about me though, but I'm a COO of a federally qualified health center. One of the reasons I'm encouraged too, being on the front lines of that, is I'm aware that there's federal grants that will support community health centers such as ours that work really hard to integrate the behavioral health clinician on the floor of the primary care. Right now is we're literally educating our primary care team to screen and ask certain questions and then embedding a behavioral health clinician on the floor so that physician can walk out of their office while the patient is still there, do a consult with their behavioral health clinician, have them walk in, and those questions are such like, how frequently do you drink alcohol? Tie that to depression. So I know that there's a movement and there's also grant opportunities to support that. So that integrated model, I hope, is the way of the future. I really do.
Yeah. I think this conversation will be so different in 10 or 20 years. And, Ozempic, like, people love that. They love the idea of taking a pill and or a shot or whatever and having it solve their problems. This is a very American solution that can be problematic. I think, one of my positions that I don't think that ADHD is fake, but I think that it's like way, way overdiagnosed. I think that throwing medications at every problem it can lead to its own issues or whatever. But this one, it's not, there's like immediate side effects, but there's so few like long-term side effects of a drug like naltrexone. And it's so cheap and so easy to get that to me, it just seems like a no-brainer. This is something that every clinician should be aware of.
I know, I'm with you, and well said. By the way, Ozempic, it's funny, our chief medical officer let me know that yerba mate is like the Ozempic of fat loss.
Interesting. I drink quite a bit of yerba mate. Maybe I should increase that. Although you got to watch out. I think it can be bad for your kidneys.
Kidneys, and my dentist told me you can stain your teeth. All right, so Sinclair Method worked wonders for you. You haven't drank in a while. You take it anymore. You're not a once daily. So let's talk about your book. But what else have you learned in this journey when you started writing the book? Like some research, some interesting facts. Let's talk about the book as well, because I'm super excited about it.
I learned quite a bit about the process of getting naltrexone approved, why it's not something that everybody knows about, including doctors, which was fairly interesting. I talked to a guy named Percy Menzies, who he runs a treatment center, but he was a drug rep for DuPont, and DuPont was one of the first companies they held a patent on naltrexone for a long time, and he was explaining to me why naltrexone sort of never took off. So Percy, I think this was in the 70s, it was developed to treat not alcohol use disorder, but heroin and morphine addiction. And it was the first FDA approved non-addicting and non-psychoactive substance to treat opioid addiction. And so Percy told me that, as a drug rep, he would go into these clinics like, he can absolutely convinced that this drug was the future, and it has one real benefit over a drug like methadone or Suboxone, and that's it doesn't fuck you up. So if you're a doctor or a pilot or a nurse, you can't really do your job if you're taking methadone, a drug that's going to get you just a little bit high. Like it's psychoactive. I don't know if it's actually psychoactive. It's mind altering in some particular way. Naltrexone isn't like that. So DuPont, the guys at DuPont thought this is the future. And so Percy explained that he would go to these clinics, but methadone had really cornered the market. And so they just thought, no, we've got this other drug. So that was his sort of explanation for why naltrexone never took off. And then it was FDA approved later, in I believe 1994 for use for alcohol use disorder. And same thing, Percy would go to these trying to sell this drug and got nowhere. And he said this time it was because the rehab industrial complex, groups like Betty Ford and Hazelden, were so anti the use of medication because they thought they knew what was best. And what was best was 28-day stay, rehab, AA, 12 steps. And that's his explanation. I think there's other structural stuff, the patent for naltrexone expired a long time ago, so it's really cheap. That's probably another reason that there's just no company has the incentive to market it because the drug company down the street could undercut them. So there's it's sort of ironic. Like the thing that makes naltrexone really inexpensive is also one of the things that has kept it from being marketed in the way that a drug like Ozempic would be.
And that's why I'm grateful that there's people like you and companies that are out there, because it still has an impact or could have an impact on millions of people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could save so many lives. And it's not, it's not going to work for everyone. I mean, I spent a lot of time talking to Joe Vopicelli. And so Joe explained to me that there's basically two types of drinkers: reward drinkers and relief drinkers. And reward drinkers, and I would bet my life on you being one. Reward drinkers are people who get that euphoria, the buzz, the high from alcohol. They get energized from drinking, right? Naltrexone works really well. And binge drinkers tend to be reward drinkers. Naltrexone works really well for that population. For relief drinkers, people who get a sedating effect, it doesn't work. And there are other drugs you can take that might target that population. Are there other drugs that might be more appropriate for that population? And to complicate it, because nothing is like cleanly divided into like two groups. Some people are both. But knowing what sort of inspecting your own behavior, asking yourself, what do I get? What happens when I drink? Do I get buzzed? Or do I get sort of tired? Do I get sedate? That can also be, I think, helpful in terms of people evaluating whether it's appropriate for them, or if they're taking it's not working. That could be why.
I have one more question for you. Drink Your Way Sober, the science-based method to break free from alcohol, releasing in September. What is your greatest hope by releasing this book?
My greatest hope, I wanted to sell 10 million copies. I'm not a woo girl. I'm not big into like manifesting, but I have been, I'm taking my dog for a walk, and I'm putting it out in the universe, 10 million books. But then I get worried that like the universe is going to misinterpret this and they're going to send me 10 million books, which I don't want. But I want it to, not just because I want to like have it like buy a jet ski, but like I want this book to save people's lives. And I think if enough people read it, it can.
Yeah. Amen. It's the impact. I want to make a difference. I love it.
And I want a jet ski.
Yeah, that too. Both ends. Let's go.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Katie, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad you joined. Thank you for spending some time with me today.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, that's the show, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Sober Strength podcast and spending some time with us today. We've got a favor to ask. If you enjoyed the show, would you please consider subscribing to the show and even leaving a rating and review? That simple act drastically helps us reach more people in our mission to help them live better, longer, healthier lives. You can also follow us if you'd like on Instagram and YouTube for regular tips and motivation around mental health, addiction, and so much more. Know that your support fuels our brand and is greatly appreciated. So until next time, stay strong and live deep.